Because we're running pretty low on time before the FNaF anniversary, I thought I should finally make a theory that I announced that I'd be making a while ago. In this video, I'm going to be solving the FNaF timeline, but not just the games one, all of them. All the books, the games, and the movie timeline. Although the games give us the most to work with, it's not too hard to create a timeline for the others because they very likely follow the same or very similar earlier parts. This might seem like a daunting task, but really what I'll be doing is putting together which events happened in which order. Also might still seem daunting, but luckily I've made videos in the past discussing these topics and plan to make more in the future. I'll still explain stuff in this video, I'll just go over a few basic pieces of evidence rather than tackling everything there is to cover, like I would have in previous videos or like I will in the future. Now, this video may sound complicated, but I think I know a way to make it work and help you guys understand it, so stick around as I explain how every FNaF timeline can come together. I'm going to begin this FNaF timeline theory video with something that may seem a bit random, but it's actually kind of an important comparison. In the MCU Disney Plus Loki series, we basically learn how the MCU timeline works. The sacred timeline consists of everything that is supposed to happen. It is the main timeline of the MCU. If something happens that shouldn't, it creates a timeline branch which can lead to its own unique timeline of events. I imagine the FNaF timelines to be similar to this. Imagine the game's timeline is the sacred timeline. It's the timeline that we mostly follow, and it's the one that kinda matters the most. There are alternate timelines though, like the movie and the Silver Eyes trilogy. These timelines have the same basis, and they likely start pretty much the same way, but they kind of branch off. My plan for this video is basically to try to figure out the breaking off points, the points in the game's timeline where the books and the movie split out from. To do that though, we need a basic timeline of events for each one. First, we of course need to solve the sacred timeline, the game's timeline. I'm not going to go over literally everything there is to go over in this video. I'll mostly just be explaining the timeline of the main events, and I'll explain why I'm placing each one where I am, though I won't be going super in depth, as like I've said, I've gone over these things and will go over more of these events in other videos. So, what started the timeline off? Well, I don't think it's anything tracing back to like the 30s like MatPat suggests. Instead, I think Afton and Henry simply started Fazbear Entertainment together, which ended up being a huge success. We know Henry was in charge of making the animatronics, and Afton in charge of business. I don't think animatronics actually existed at the time, just costumes, but eventually Henry transforms these costumes into animatronics, creating the blueprints for the Freddy's characters. He creates the first versions of these characters, and as we learn in the Mimic story, Fazbear Entertainment then bought out Edwin Murray's company, and he is tasked with turning more of the costumes into animatronics, and then the Mimic story happens, likely around 1979 or 1980. Now moving on to more important events, the driving force for the plot of the series. This is heavily debated, and I think it's what I'll spend the most time explaining, but I don't think Afton started killing because of anything relating to his children dying and him grieving. I do think someone died, but I don't think it was his grief for that caused his descent into madness. In the Stitch Wraith epilogues, one of the most important characters is Dr. Talbert, who lost his wife and shut out his daughter after that. I think something similar is probably what happened with Afton. Lots of theories suggest that Afton killed Charlotte as revenge because Henry, her dad, built Fredbear, who killed the bite victim. But there's two reasons I don't think that's the case. Number one, I think Charlotte died prior to the bite victim. I am of the belief that the bite victim is the runaway in Midnight Motorist. Yeah, he's a little kid and it doesn't make sense for him to break the window. Yeah, Mike can't be the person on the couch because he is demanding Afton and also doesn't care about the bite victim. Sure, I've heard it all before. But those arguments aren't that great. First of all, just because he's a little kid doesn't mean he can't break a window. Glass is pretty fragile. Plus, he could easily have something in his room to break it with. That's also assuming the animatronic out the window isn't the thing that broke it, which it very much could have been. Also, just because Mike bullies his younger brother doesn't mean he doesn't care about him. Older siblings often do this thing where they bully their younger sibling, but they're also very protective of them. Basically, no one can make fun of their younger sibling except them. And that doesn't mean they don't care. I'm the youngest child, and my older brother and sister were the most annoying people in the world, but they still cared about me, and I still cared about them. And now they're like my best friends, so that argument is flawed. And saying that Mike demanded Afton isn't that strong either when you consider that it could have easily just been a request. And even if it isn't, the whole point of this interaction is Orange Guy ignoring the person on the couch, something that Immortal and the Restless indicates Afton does to Mike. So I think Charlotte died before the bite victim did, the incident creating both Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie, and Shadow Freddy is the animatronic out the window luring the bite victim away. This is when he likes the animatronics, only being afraid of them after this, because of this. And number 2, Afton already has motivation to kill Charlotte. He is given this motivation in the books. Afton kills Charlotte because he is jealous of his success. The only reason I think Mrs. Afton is part of Afton's motivation is because a dead wife also appears in the books and stuff. The backstory given to Vanessa in Security Breach's retro CDs also seems to be more about the Aftons than Vanessa, considering her supposed dad is literally named William, and they indicate that a divorce happened and that Afton was evil from the start. It's implied that Mrs. Afton killed herself or died in some way after they divorced, but it's even possible Afton killed her, which would also explain the mound in Midnight Motorist, although that also works even if she killed herself. Like I said, I don't think Afton started killing because of grief. I think it was entirely due to his jealousy of Henry. Not only was he jealous of Henry's success, but also his family. Afton's wife dying probably destroyed Afton's family, while Henry's is perfect, and so he kills Charlotte to ruin Henry's family too. Then the bite victim dies, though not before being experimented on with Afton's gas chambers. The logbook indicates that Mike is the player of FNaF 4, but also that the bite victim went through the experiments from FNaF 4, so he likely was put there as punishment for sneaking out in Midnight Motorist, hence Afton's line of, "he will be sorry when he gets back." I think Elizabeth dies after the bite victim, considering Babies is being advertised in 1985 as we see in the Into the Pit game, meaning Elizabeth is probably dead and the rental service is now up and running, but also probably before the missing children incident in 1985, and the pizza world is connected to Sister location as indicated by Help 1 and 2's breaker room level, and is described in Dance With Me as having a big red door just like Fredbear's. So Fredbear's probably shut down from the bite, and then was transformed into Babies, meaning Elizabeth had to die after him. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is Eleanor. I've already explained in previous videos why I think the Stitch line and the Tales books are in the game's timeline, and I'm not going to do that again. I've already mentioned the Mimic in this video, and I will again. But Eleanor is a bit interesting. She is designed similar to Circus Baby, but she is very slim and birthed from agony. Sound familiar? Well, we learn in the 10th Fright's epilogue that Ella from 1:35 AM was under Eleanor's control. 1:35, May 13th, is Charlotte's birthday in the novel trilogy, in which Ella is actually a Charlie bot. The 4th Charlie bot looks like Circus Baby and is birthed from agony. Basically, the idea is that maybe Eleanor, or the force of agony that creates her, uses the 4th Charlie bot as a vessel, which is the body that we always see her in. What's interesting about that, though, is the implication that the Charlie bots exist in the games because Eleanor exists in the games. Now, the puppet doesn't exist in the novel trilogy, which is why Henry makes the bots, because she doesn't possess anything. But in the games, what if he did make the bots, but didn't do anything with them because he found out about Charlotte possessing the puppet? Then the bots are left behind, and the 4th one is used as a vessel for Eleanor. So the Charlie bots would probably be made after the bite, but probably before Elizabeth dies. After Elizabeth dies is the missing children incident, Freddy shutting down, and then FNaF 2 opening with the toys 2 years later. Not too much to touch on here. The Save Them minigame shows Purple Guy with a badge, so we know Afton worked as a security guard there under a fake identity, because he wouldn't have been allowed in otherwise. He kills the Save Them kids and seems to try to destroy the possessed withered animatronics to experiment on them, but he fails. Then Jeremy works, the bite of 87 probably happens, and Afton sends Mike to work at Freddy's under the name Fritz Smith. I think this because Mike doesn't seem to know Afton was a killer until Sister Location, in which he claims Afton told him to go there. Since Sister Location is after FNaF 1, as I'll talk about in a sec, Afton likely told him to go to FNaF 1 and 2 as well, likely to investigate the animatronics, but with him being unable to efficiently do so with them trying to murder him. Michael Afton being Mike Schmidt and Fritz Smith is pretty much undeniable to me considering they get fired for the exact same reasons. The FNaF 1 and 4 protagonists are the same person, as we know from the FNaF 4 phone call Easter egg, and FNaF 3 has hallucinations from animatronics from both FNaF 1 and 2, indicating they're all the same person. So Mike works at FNaF 2 and then 1 under Afton's orders, and Freddy's finally shuts down. After FNaF 1, Afton returns to Freddy's and collects the endoskeletons of the animatronics, destroying one per night, bringing them to Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, and then returning the next night. He gets the first 4, melting them together and injecting them into the fun times. That's why Sister Location is after FNaF 1, because the endos from the FNaF 1 animatronics are injected into the fun times prior to Sister Location. Now, what's after Sister Location? FNaF 4. But FNaF 4 is in 1983, I hear you saying. No, it is not. The minigames are, the nightmares are not. As I said earlier, while the bite victim did go through the nightmares, the actual protagonist is Mike, and because of the FNaF 1 phone call playing, it happened at some point after FNaF 1. But in the survival logbook, Mike draws Nightmare Fredbear under recent dreams, and images in the logbook depict the FNaF 3 office, meaning FNaF 4 is recent by the time of FNaF 3, happening roughly right before, probably being what motivated Mike to go to Fazbear's Fright and find Afton. Something more controversial though is the date of FNaF 3 and FNaF 6. I made a video recently talking about the structural integrity of the FNaF timeline when throwing in the Mimic being in 1980 and the Pizzaplex opening 40 years later in 2020. You wouldn't believe the number of comments that said something along the lines of, "This is all solved if you just think FNaF 3 and 6 are earlier than 2023. Like, Yes, obviously, but I think people were missing the point that I literally discussed towards the end of the video, that I have problems with that too. I can see FNAF 3 being in 2015, 30 years after the first Freddy's closed rather than the FNAF 1 location. It doesn't make as much sense for 30 years after Freddy's closed its doors to not be referring to the last time it shut down, but I can at least understand that. HRY 223 is harder to come by though, because it clearly indicates FNAF 6 to be in 2023, the exact year we've believed for a while to be FNAF 3's year. That doesn't seem coincidental. It could be a date, like February 23rd, or it could just be a number for the file, but it seems way too specific. Unfortunately, while I don't think that these make that much sense, they are the only way to make things work. Luckily, the other explanations, while not super convincing, do at the very least work. They're not satisfying, but they don't completely defy logic, kind of. So to ensure the Pizzaplex opening in 2020 or sooner works, we're just gonna place FNAF 3 in 2015 and FNAF 6 in 2017, the years those games came out for the sake of consistency. Moving on now, there's not much left that I really need to explain now, so I'm pretty much just gonna go over the order of events now. After FNAF 6 is of course Ultimate Custom Night, and after that is the Stitch line, then the Mimic epilogues, FNAF VR during that, then the Pizzaplex opens, the Storyteller happens, Vanessa and Gregory are now possessed, which is when FNAF AR, the therapy tapes, and GGY all happen pretty much simultaneously, which we know because not all the therapists are dead yet by the time of GGY, and Lewis is talked about during the therapy tapes, so they're all around the same time. This then leads to Security Breach a couple years later, along with Help Wanted 2, and then Ruin directly after that. So that's the FNAF games timeline. What's next? Well, we probably won't spend too much time talking about the other timelines. Because there's no complete explanations nor contradictions, the beginnings of the timelines are most likely the same. Sure, different children are born at different times, but the children only start mattering to the story around the time of the divorce, where Elizabeth gets involved in the custody battle. Before that, if we just disregard the actual birth times of the kids, the splits can start much later. Sure, Afton isn't British in the movies, but he's still the same character, so that doesn't require its own split. So the first split happens to start the movie timeline, and that's during the Afton divorce. The question is Michael in Afton? Did William divorce Michael's mom? This is still a debate because it wasn't really stated in the movies or the book for the movie. The main things that make people think they aren't is just the lack of that being explained by now, and the fact that Mike and Vanessa seem to have a thing for each other, which could also just be another Star Wars situation, but who knows. Garrett was kidnapped and killed by Afton in Nebraska, and Afton seems to live in Minnesota. It's not that far, but it's far enough that Afton killing him seems very personal, because why would he travel that far just to kill that kid? Why not just kill kids, in his own town, which he does later on anyway. That's the main reason I think Mike is Afton's son, his dad in the movie simply being his stepdad, but Garrett's actual dad. I think Afton and Mike's mom were together long enough for them to have Mike, then they divorced. Afton likely got with someone else, then had Vanessa, while his ex-wife remarried and had Garrett with her new husband. In this universe, Charlotte's death and the missing children incident happened in the same way, just at different times. Charlotte probably still died in 1983, but Garrett and the missing children don't die until 1987, shutting Freddy's down and leading Afton to use a fake name. Then the actual movie happens in 2000. That's just one split though. There's a few others to go over. Next up, the novel trilogy. The novel trilogy also starts the same way as the game's timeline all the way up until Charlotte's death. It happens for the same reasons, it just happens a bit differently. Instead of happening outside Fredbear's, it happens on the inside in a room with Sammy. The puppet isn't involved here, and she doesn't possess the puppet because it doesn't exist in this timeline. So the split here happens right before Charlotte's death. There's a few other events like Elizabeth's death and the missing children incident that also happen at the same time that they do in the games, but they happen ever so slightly differently. For example, Elizabeth died to Circus Baby when the pizza world didn't exist yet, and this version of Circus Baby is the fourth Charlie bot. It's basically as if the timeline splits, Charlotte dies in two different ways depending on the timeline, then they reconnect, and then Baby's events happen in two different ways, splitting the timeline again. The missing children incident also happens in the summer of 1985, but it actually takes place over the course of a few months, and some of the victims are slightly different. Jeremy doesn't exist, and instead Cassidy is Bonnie. Instead of Cassidy being Golden Freddy, Michael Brooks is Golden Freddy, and Michael Brooks doesn't exist in the games. So there has to be another split before Elizabeth dies that continues for the rest of the Silver Eyes timeline, because the rest can't align. So yeah, Charlotte dies, Charlie bots are created, Elizabeth dies, the missing children incident happens, Freddy's closes, 10 years later the novel trilogy actually happens, and Afton dies with the children getting set free at the end of the fourth closet. So those are all the splits, right? Well, no, because there's one other thing we haven't accounted for, and it's from the game's timeline. Different endings. What some people don't understand about alternate endings in FNAF games is that the stuff that happens in them is still important. They're possible alternate paths that could have been taken. Each security breach ending leads to its own branched timeline, yet only one of them is canon and leads to Ruin. But then, Ruin also has multiple endings. We don't need to discuss much about alternate endings here, but there are just a couple that we do have to talk about a little bit, and that's FNaF 3 and the Burn Trap ending. FNaF 3 has two endings, the good ending and the bad ending, and what may surprise you is that the canon ending is actually the bad ending. No, I'm not joking, and no, I'm not wrong. Back in Daco's Scott interview, Scott decided not to answer which ending happened because the answer was complex. We know now that the missing kids are in Molten Freddy in FNaF 6, which is after FNaF 3, yet FNaF 3's Happiest Day minigame has the missing kids and Charlotte be set free. FNaF 6 forces that to happen later. The reason Scott said the answer is complex is because technically, both endings are canon. The bad ending is canon in FNaF 3 because the spirits are still around, but the good ending is canon overall because Happiest Day does happen eventually. But there would be a branched timeline where Happiest Day does happen in FNaF 3 much sooner than it actually does. In that case, the missing kids and Charlotte would be set free sooner, and for that to happen, Afton probably would have just died in FNaF 3. Technically, the ending newspaper of FNaF 3 shows that he survived, but in the case of the good ending, it just makes sense for him to have died. No Lefty, no Molten Freddy, no Scrap Trap, none of them would exist anymore by FNaF 6, so it likely just wouldn't have happened. Baby would still be on the loose, but I doubt FNaF 6 would have happened just for her. Without FNaF 6, the Pizzaplex wouldn't have been built, there'd be no Frights or Tales books, and so the series probably would have just ended right there. Boom. End of another timeline. Now, 4 of the 6 security breach endings are pretty easy to answer. The series kinda ends after them because nothing known happens afterwards. Obviously there would be different events, but because there's no continuation, there's no point in continuing. Same reason why after the first FNaF movie, that timeline ends, because we don't know what happens next. FNaF 2 will come out next year, but for now, we have no idea what's gonna happen. The fire ending has the Pizzaplex burned down and Vanny die. The escape ending has Gregory kidnapped by Vanny. The van ending has Gregory and Freddy escape. And the disassemble Vanny ending has Vanny and Freddy die. Nothing can really be said about what happens next. The Princess Quest ending is the canon one, leading to Ruin and Help Wanted 2. But what about the Burn Trap ending? Well, throughout Security Breach and Fazbear Frights, there seemed to be a big build-up towards the Afton amalgamation being recreated in the games, and in this case, from him combining with the Blob, which has the FNaF AR animatronics in it, which are controlled by Glitchtrap, who controls Burn Trap. This obviously didn't happen, but canonically, I think if the Burn Trap ending ended up being the canon ending, maybe it actually would've. I could definitely be wrong, but I think it just makes sense. If the Blob attacks Burn Trap, Glitchtrap could just take control of the AR animatronics in the Blob, because the AR animatronics are controlled by Glitchtrap, and then Glitchtrap can take over the entire Blob. However, even if I'm right about that, it's unclear what would actually happen. He'd likely escape just like the Blob did between Security Breach and Ruin, but we don't know for sure, so the hypothetical recreation of the Afton amalgamation would be at the end of that branch timeline, and that timeline would just kinda end there because, like I said, we don't know what happens next. As for the Ruin endings, those are at the latest point in the timeline, and they will of course be their own branches, but they also don't lead anywhere else just yet. Eventually they will, but right now they don't, and we don't know which one is canon yet, so the timeline will end with the 3 Ruin endings. And that's pretty much it. There is every FNaF timeline solved. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to, and let me know if you agree with how I put this all together. If not, let me know what you would change, but regardless, I will see you all in the next video. Still can't believe the FNaF 10th anniversary is in a few days. Damn. Anyway, bye guys.